I'd like to call the hearing to order. I apologize for being a few minutes late. Good afternoon, everyone. Administrator Klotz, I'd like to welcome you to your first appearance before this subcommittee and also thank you for your service to this country. I understand that you are a retired Lieutenant General in the United States Air Force with over 38 years of service and some impressive accomplishments. We look forward to hearing from you today on your vision of the NNSA and your priorities for the fiscal year 2016 budget request. General Davis, I'd also like to welcome you and your service to this country and for your appearance before this subcommittee. We appreciate your attendance today. Dr. Cook, this is your 5th time before this subcommittee, and it's a pleasure to have you back. The President's budget request for weapons activities is $8.8 billion, an increase of $615 million, or 75%, over the fiscal year 2015 enacted level. That figure does not include the $234 million in nuclear emergency response activities that were funded in this account in fiscal year 2015, but that are now proposed to be shifted to defense nuclear non-proliferation in this budget request. After accounting for this shift, the request for direct support for weapons programs is $839 million, or 10.5% above fiscal year 2015. The President's budget request for 050 defense activities is $38 billion over the budget caps in the Budget Control Act. Those caps are essentially flat for fiscal year 2016, which means that every increase over last year's amount will have to be offset by some other activity. With the magnitude of the defense needs we are facing, tough decisions must be made. You will have to ensure that we understand the importance of every dollar you request and that we are fully confident, have full confidence in your ability to execute those dollars. We must also have confidence in the NNSA's program to implement management improvements to ensure construction projects and acquisition programs are on time and within budget. Though there have been some modest gains, serious challenges remain. The continued reliability of our nation's nuclear weapons stockpile associated with infrastructure is my highest defense priority, and it is our responsibility to ensure that no more time or money is wasted on failed and unaffordable strategies. The needs of the nuclear security enterprise are too great, and the mission is too important to fail. So today we hope to get a better understanding of your strategy to accomplish this mission and transform the NNSA into an agency that delivers on its promises. Please ensure that for the hearing record that responses to the questions for the record and any supporting information requested by the subcommittee are delivered in final form to us no later than 4 weeks from the time you receive them. I also ask that members have any additional questions that they would like to submit to the subcommittee for the record, that they please do so by close of business tomorrow. That means you might have to bring them by a carrier pigeon if the snow comes this week. With those opening comments, I'd like to yield to Mr. Voskowski, acting as ranking member today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Kapler is on the House floor and will be delayed. On her behalf, would ask that her opening statement be entered into the record if I could. And simply, Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding the hearing, and gentlemen, for your service to our country and for being here today to present your budget request. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I guess I could turn on the mic now. Administrator Klotz, the floor is yours. Your full statement will be included in the record.
Thank you. And I assume the microphone is on. I'm not seeing a light. Chairman Simpson, Representative Voskowski, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to present the President's fiscal year 2016 budget request from the Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Dr. Don Cook and Brigadier General S.L. Davis. We value this committee's leadership in national security as well as its robust and abiding support for the mission and the people of NNSA. Our budget request, which comprises more than 40% of DOE's overall budget, is $12.6 billion. This is an increase of $1.2 billion, or 10.2%, over the FY 2015 enacted levels. This funding is extraordinarily important to NNSA's missions to maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear weapons stockpile, to prevent, counter, and respond to the threat of nuclear proliferation and nuclear terrorism, and to support the capability of our nuclear-powered Navy to project power and protect American and Allied interests around the world. By supporting growth in each of our 4 appropriations accounts, this budget represents the commitment by the administration to NNSA's vital and enduring missions and NNSA's role in ensuring a strong national defense. And this mission is accomplished through the hard work and innovative spirit of a highly talented workforce committed to public service. To provide them the tools they need to carry out their complex and challenging tasks both now and in the future, we must continue to modernize our scientific, technical, and engineering capabilities and infrastructure. In doing so, we are mindful of our obligation to continually improve, as you suggested, our business practices and to be responsible stewards of the resources that the Congress and the American people have entrusted to us. To this end, NNSA continues to make progress on key surveillance and life extension programs, which directly support the President's direction to maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear arsenal. Funding at the fiscal year 2016 budget request level will ensure these key life extension programs stay on track. The budget request also funds a new disciplined approach to achieving key capabilities and key deliverables for our uranium and for our plutonium capabilities. NNSA will continue driving improvements in acquisition and project and program management practices and policies and federal oversight across the enterprise. Although no less important, I'll hold off discussions in my opening remarks on NNSA's defense, nuclear non-proliferation, and naval reactors programs until your second hearing with this subcommittee on March 25th. These highlights are just a few of the critical national security responsibilities that this budget funds. However, let me be frank and point out that the looming possibility of sequestration is a major threat to NNSA's missions. In developing the budget, NNSA was directed to request the funds that we need to accomplish the missions that we have been tasked to do. The FY 2016 budget request reflects this direction. Another round of cuts would have devastating impacts on our weapons program, to include the possibility of pushing key programs further out into the future and driving up their cost. It would also have grave impacts on the science, technology, and engineering work taking place at our laboratories and at our production plants, work that underpins our nuclear security and our broader national security. While we have made some tough resource decisions across the NNSA, the Secretary of Energy and I believe that our enduring missions are too vital to the nation's security to be further constrained by spending caps, a position which we urge this subcommittee to support. Again, sir, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today.
Thank you, and again, thank you for your service to the country and for what you're doing now. It's much appreciated. I'll ask questions while the ranking member gets settled. But let me ask first, does any member have other hearings that are going on that they need to be out of quicker? Okay, if that's the case. Okay. Let me first ask, the long-range standoff missile. There is one new life extension program for the W-80-4 warhead as part of the plan to produce a new nuclear-tipped cruise missile, the long-range standoff missile, for LRSO. Can you tell me why the LRSO program has been moved up 2 years in your stockpile plans, and what will be the total cost of this life extension program? The lifespan of the current cruise missile is good until at least 2030. What is driving this schedule? Last year, the budget request deferred this program for 2 years to fit within budget control caps. Have any of the risks or military requirements changed from last year? And previous life extension programs were only funded around $40 to $50 million per year at this early stage in the acquisition program. This request for the L-80-4 LEP is $195 million. Why is this effort so much more expensive than previous LEPs?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, let me start by talking about the overall direction of the program, and then I would ask Dr. Cook to talk about specific programmatic details. The reason why we have put in our budget request an acceleration of the work that we would do for the warhead, the W-80-4, on the Air Force's long-range standoff capability is the Air Force and the Department of Defense have expressed a need for military requirement to move the date for capability 2 years to the left. And therefore, this whole idea was vetted within the Nuclear Weapons Council. We took a very close look at it in terms of what it would mean in terms of workload on our laboratories, on our production plants, and on our funding capabilities, and decided in collaboration with the rest of our Department of Defense colleagues in the Nuclear Weapons Council that we could support a move of our work, our portion of the work, the warhead portion of the work, from 2027 to 2025. And I'll leave it to Dr. Cook to talk about specifics of the program.
Sure, I'll try to answer it briefly. Because the first production unit was moved up 2 years, we needed to take a more aggressive start. What we learned, to answer your question, from the W76-1 and from the B61 Mod 12 was that we had funded the technology maturation efforts too late. GAO also did a review of LEP activities, and the recommendation was we fund upfront the technology maturation activities to reduce the risk and to make the rest of the life extension programs move more slowly. So we've taken that experience. We increased by $167 million because of 2-year push up our request from the fiscal 15 FinCIP, and we have the teams now in the third quarter of fiscal, in this year, third quarter of the 6-1 phase. We go to 6-2 in July.
What would be the impacts on security, on anything else, if this 2-year move up of this wasn't funded?
Do you want to answer
Yeah,
the first part?
I'll
do
start the first part. In terms of the warhead itself, the current warhead on the air-launched cruise missile, the W-80, the family from which we propose that the warhead for the long-range standoff capability come from is in reasonably good shape. So the real issue has to do with the missile platform, and that really is an Air Force, Pentagon issue, so I would leave it to them to describe what their concerns are, and I suspect they would have to do that in a closed session.
On the W-80 warhead itself, we made the down selection to the family, but we recognize that the existing warhead is an older warhead, and so there might be some modest risk in having a later date, but the real issue here is that many of the non-nuclear technologies will be drawn from the B61 Mod 12. So if we do the W80 Mod 4 after the 61 is completed, we can most cost effectively use those technologies. It also levelizes the workforce, particularly at Y12 and at Pantex, to do this, and that was one of the key considerations in the Weapon Council decision as well.
Thank you. Ms. Kaptur?
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to thank you and the other members for their courtesy. I was on the floor testifying on the, or speaking on the Passenger Rail Act. I wanted to also say that both Mr. Visklosky and Mr. Roybal-Allard were here before I was, so I'm happy to rotate to them first.
Go ahead.
Are they okay? All right. Thank you so very much for your testimony today. In view of the time, I'll just move into questions in that we placed through Mr. Visklosky our statement in the record, our opening statement in the record. Dr. Cook, in fiscal year 2015, Congress directed a new program be formed to provide focus and transparency to manufacturing development activities that were in your budget request. In the fiscal year 2016 budget request, you are eliminating dedicated funding for additive manufacturing. How much of the budget request invests in development of additive manufacturing capabilities for stockpile production needs? And how do you expect to develop a domestic supplier base without coordinated strategic management?
The short answer is that we're not reducing the amount of money we're deploying in additive manufacturing, but it is a field that is growing so rapidly that although in fiscal 15 we have a separate line for it, in 16 we've requested that not be a separate line. Our estimate is that By the end of 15, when you count not only the part which was appropriated as the omnibus, but other parts in the core programs, our expenditure on additive manufacturing for weapons will approach $30 million per annum. So in 16, based on the rate of the development, we thought it would be best to treat that basically as normal business because it is growing so rapidly. That allows us to tie it to the LEPs directly as well as do additional research.
Thank you for your clarification on that. The NNSA has already been tasked to provide a technology roadmap for developing additive manufacturing. When might we receive the roadmap, and what might it say?
I believe the roadmap is scheduled to be delivered in April. It's about mid-April. I know this because we had a meeting on this earlier this week. Went through substance of the roadmap. It's looking good, and so the short answer is about a month and a few weeks from now.
All right. Mr. Administrator, development of the long-range standoff missile will improve our military's long-range strike capabilities. Will the advancements provide new military capability? And might these have adverse impacts on our strategic stability?
Again, I think that is a question which is based upon military requirements. Our role in this process is to develop a safe, secure, and reliable, effective warhead for a particular military requirement. So the need to move from air-launched, to have a successor to the current air-launched cruise missile has been a military requirement defined by the Air Force through U.S. Strategic Command and up to the Pentagon. What we were asked to do in this particular case is to consider the various options and alternatives for a warhead that would go on a new platform for a cruise missile-like capability. And that's what we've done by taking the existing warhead that's on the air-launched cruise missile. We will do some work to enhance the safety and the security of that particular warhead.
Do you think that there might be perceptions by other nuclear states that this would serve to destabilize those relationships?
Well, this is a capability that the Air Force, and now I'm speaking as a former Air Force officer, although we have an Air Force officer. Maybe I should defer that to SL. But this is a capability which the Air Force, quite frankly, has had for some time. SL, did you want to?
No, ma'am, and I would agree. Obviously, the DoD has identified some new threats. They're trying to stay ahead of the defensive efforts that are going on, and that's what's going on here, to maintain that capability, the same capability that we currently have into the future.
Thank you. And my final question, Mr. Administrator, in this round is your fiscal year 2016 budget request includes $100 million for operating uranium enrichment centrifuges that were constructed as part of a joint demonstration project with USAF, now known as Centrus. How would you evaluate the progress made by the interagency review to understand the minimum uranium and tritium requirements, and what do you believe to be the best use of taxpayer dollars to meet those requirements?
That's an extraordinarily good question, and thank you for asking it. There has been an interagency working group addressing what our tritium requirements are, what our low-enriched uranium requirements are, and what ultimately our highly enriched uranium requirements for naval reactors might be. This process is still going on. I believe we have some reporting requirements mandated by legislation that will require us to report the results of that particular effort. In the meantime, what the Department of Energy through the NNSA has done is to keep in a warm standby mode the 120 centrifuges which are now managed by Centrus at the Piketon plant in Ohio, and we've asked the M&O contractor for the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee to provide oversight for that. So this capability, we feel we ought to be able to maintain until such time as we determine what a reasonable path forward is to meet not only the low-enriched uranium requirements that the nation has, but also the tritium requirements that the nation has.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for this round.
Thank you. We're fortunate to have on this committee still the former chairman and ranking member of this subcommittee, Mr. Frelinghuysen and Mr. Wiskoski, who now probably have the toughest jobs in Congress as chairman of the Defense Committee and ranking member of the Defense Committee, with the potential sequestration and the impact that it would have on those appropriations, but they obviously have a very strong interest in this subject. So, Mr. Frelinghuysen?
He's been trying to move me off the committee. I'm being facetious because I know this is being recorded for posterity. But Chairman Simpson is a great chairman and has been on this committee as long as I've been. And Mr. Wiskoski and I and Congressman Calvert and Ms. Capter and I had the Secretary of Defense before us this morning across the hall, and Chairman Martin Dempsey, and not surprisingly, and there was someone else, the comptroller there too. They affirmed the importance of the nuclear deterrent, and that's something which is so critical. Without getting into sort of the details about platforms, your role, we're aware of the Department of Defense needs. How, given what, and you have increases in here, in your budget, how would you manage those reductions? How would you absorb those reductions under the Budget Control Act? I mean, you've come in with some increases for, weapons activity, but how would you actually get to the sequester numbers?
Because, as you well know, the NNSA budget is part of the larger 050 budget. We essentially draw from the same pot of money that the Department of Defense does for the platforms that are associated with the nuclear deterrent. Therefore, decisions about where we would go within specific life extension programs, but also funding for various capabilities, be it in the science and technology area, be it in surveillance, be it in uranium, plutonium, or tritium production, would have to be part of a discussion with the Department of Defense in terms of what they thought the priorities were with respect to military requirements. So I would expect that would be a dialogue that would take place again within the Nuclear Weapons Council in terms of what was most dear to them from a overall national strategy and policy perspective, informed, of course, by NNSA in terms of technical feasibility, costs, managing the workload across our laboratories and our production plants.
Yeah, as Mr. Simpson said and others have said in the public arena, there's a distinct possibility that we have to mark to the law here.
Right.
So we're going to need your cooperation and support to make the right decisions. No matter what our military brass says, and I think most members feel the nuclear deterrent is so critically important, we still have to mark to those budget caps. So more cooperation, not that we've had any resistance, is better rather than less, and I'm confident we'll meet our obligations to support the deterrent. So I just want to, but I think it's important for you to give us some assurance that you're going to be working to take a look at those reductions which you can impact just from your perspective.
Yes, sir. We'll commit to do that, and we'll also commit to work very closely, collaboratively, openly, transparently with the members of this committee, as well as the staff.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it. Mr. Wiskoski?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Ministry, I understand you have been in your position for just under a year, and I have had great respect for those who have preceded you in that position. But just before I ask my two questions, would tell you that I'm very disturbed that as I go through some of the issues and questions that we would like to see covered today, whether it's uranium enrichment under the now so-called centrist, whether it's laboratory overhead, whether it's laboratory-directed research, whether it's excess facilities, I was at first struck that these were simply Xerox questions from another decade. And so would urge you to be very deliberate and very demanding of your staff and people at NSA to fix some of these problems that have been long-standing for well in excess of a decade to a decade and a half. And again, I understand you've been in your position less than a year, but I'm appalled that we continue to cover the same ground year in and year out with all the bright, competent people under your direction. The first of two questions I have is you are working to finalize the design of the B6112 and move towards production in that life extension program by 2020. In this year's budget, you are also undertaking major work on both the W88 alteration that will also begin production in 2020, and the life extension program of the W80 that is part of the LRSO program. I am concerned both about the workload of taking on so many design projects simultaneously and the affordability of doing all three weapons programs at the same time, particularly when we may not have the luxury of exceeding the budget caps. If I could have your response, please.
Yes, sir, and if I could give a general response, then Don can talk about the specifics of the B-61 and the other LEPs. Those were issues which concerned us as well as we confronted the requests and that were coming out of the Nuclear Weapons Council in terms of the way forward on these LEPs. And we had to look very, very carefully at workload within our laboratories and within the production plants, particularly at Pantex and at Y12, to make sure that the timing and the way in which these things unfolded would not create bottlenecks in terms of the workforce and the throughput. The other issue we had to do was to make sure, as Dr. Cook alluded to earlier, there is overlap in terms of specific types of components and capabilities and developments in each of these LEPs, and we had to make sure that they were timed in such a way that developments in one LEP that had spin-offs in another LEP were phased in such a way that we could proceed with both.
Sure. Let me give you a quick status of where we are. I'll start with the bottom line and then support of it. Every single LEP is meeting its scope, cost, and schedule requirements at this point. So some of the details, the 76-1 that we had some startup issues with several years ago, I recall deeply. You probably do too. We passed the halfway point last September. We're now in the second half of the build. We'll complete that by the end of fiscal.
Oh, which system is that?
W76-1.
Okay.
It's the sea-carried ballistic missile for the Navy. The 61 Mod 12, the gravity bomb, has met all of its requirements, both for the bomb body and for the Air Force portion of the tail kit this year. That is coming along well. In that program, I required, and the labs and plants have supported it, that we introduce earned value management techniques and the full extent of them in the life extension programs, because these are major acquisitions. I hold a quarterly review. General Davis can probably comment too on the Air Force and the Navy personnel and duty folks who come over to the Forrestal building to join in the quarterly reviews. Following that, each quarter we issue a selected acquisition report, which your staff have access to and you can track, and it supports where we are in the programs. Most recently, in addition, on the W88 Alt 370, which is the new arming and fusing and firing system for, again, the sea-carried weapon system, but now W88, through a concerted surveillance program, Nuclear Weapon Council decided that we would undertake a refresh of the conventional high explosive based on surveillance results, and because it would be most effective and efficient to do that while we had the weapons at Pantex to do the AF and F anyway. Lastly, on the W80 Mod 4, we've commented already directly, but believe that that's going to follow the track of actually good planning, getting the tech maturation funding up front, and then a fairly smooth execution.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, just one other question, and Dr. Cook, I would congratulate you because it is my understanding under the B6112, things are on schedule and on budget. In many of these programs, you have encountered significant cost increases and schedule delays in the past. As far as the 88 and the 80, if we look back on the B6112, are we past those points of where there's still uniqueness and uncertainty, or might we still have concern that we will hit some bumps in the road, if you would?
For the 88, I'll answer. Specifically for the 88, we are past that point.
Okay.
The 88 is now in its third year of full-scale engineering, so all the early phase things are done. It's also following EVM. We again do quarterly reviews and selected acquisition reports. The W80 Mod 4 is not yet at that point, but it'll follow the same track. So we've already begun the quarterly reviews. We already bring in the Air Force in the reviews. We're tightly coupled there. And because of the development on the 61 non-nuclear components, we're going to be doing a heavy reuse LEP. That always actually reduces the risk rather than increases it. I might ask if General Davis has any comment to offer with regard to the partnership for the Armed Forces and the DoD on these efforts.
Well, I would just add that, so as we look to the Nuke Weapons Council to help us with the requirements, we are lashed up with the DoD throughout the development and acquisition program. And matter of fact, my role being embedded at the NSA is to help facilitate that relationship, which I believe is very strong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fleshman.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
General Davis, Dr. Cook, General Klotz, great to see you all. Thank you so much. General Klotz, I'd like to just say I'm looking so forward to being with you next week as we do the ribbon cutting on the roads for the uranium processing facility. I want to thank you personally for all of your hard work on this project, bringing this in under budget, under time, and I appreciate that so much, as well as your willingness to work with us throughout your tenure in this position. As you know, the uranium processing facility is key to the future of Y-12 and reducing the risk of operating in very seriously aging facilities. Please discuss with some specificity for our subcommittee the need, the highs and lows of the funding profile and the critical need for sequencing the work to lowering funding highs in the out years.
This specifically for UPF?
That's correct, sir.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you, Congressman, and I too look forward to coming down to Y-12. As I was explaining earlier, many of these projects have a very long life from start to finish. They're very complex buildings that are doing work that require the utmost in terms of safety and security features. And therefore, as we reach various milestones over a long period of time, it's important to celebrate, to recognize the work of the people who have been doing this, the actual labor at the site. And so I'm delighted that you will be coming down and that we'll be able to properly recognize the people that are there. The UPF program was one which, quite frankly, was in trouble. And roughly a year or so ago, the NNSA commissioned a red team report that was chaired by Dr. Tom Mason at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. He came up with a series of recommendations of how to get UPF back on track. We are in the process of implementing every one of those recommendations in the so-called red team report. One of my first actions in coming on board 11 months ago was to appoint a plutonium, a uranium program manager, Mr. Tim Driscoll, to give him a responsibility over the entire uranium mission from cradle to grave, as it were, including owning the project that was being completed, or is being completed, at Y-12 to get us out of building 9215 by the year 2025. as they have, then a number of steps that he has taken has been to reduce as much as possible what we refer to as material at risk, dangerous, potentially dangerous materials that are in aging facilities and get them into newer facilities, thereby decreasing some of the concern that we may have about the safety of aging facilities. At the same time, we've adopted the Red Team's approach to the construction of UPF. We're no longer going for a single big box building to house all the activities associated with uranium processing. It's a very simple assumption that we make, that if you have to build everything inside of one building, you have to build it at the highest margin of safety and security, and the cost per square foot is a lot higher at the top end of that spectrum than it is the lower end. So we segregate activities that are associated with uranium processing into facilities that have various levels of security and safety requirements. So in the process, we've divided the whole project up into six sub-projects. We just completed the site readiness sub-project, which is part of the celebration that we'll be at in a few days. We are beginning, we're well underway under the site infrastructure and services sub-project. In fact, we expect to complete some of the paperwork to move forward on that this month, and then complete it in April 2018 at a total project cost of about $78 million. Then we'll move into a site preparation and long lead procurement phase, and then the final part of that, once we've achieved 90% design on each of the other projects, is we will move forward with building those three, the segregated buildings I talked about before, a mechanical and electrical building to house air conditioning, electrical facilities, transformers. We'll also have a salvage and accountability building, and finally the main processing building, which will be that building which does the processes that require the highest safety and security margin.
Thank you, General. Mr. Chairman, I think I'll wait for my final two questions to the next round.
Ms. Roybal-Howard?
Administrator Klotz, the Congress asked that there be an examination into the mission, organization, and management of the enterprise, and to consider alternatives. What was found, well, first of all, that there was no question with regards to the efficacy of the nuclear deterrent for the foreseeable future, and it also found that the stockpile, was safe, secure, and reliable, and that the quality of science and research is undiminished. However, it did find some areas of concern, and that was that the existing governance structure and many of the practices of the enterprise are inefficient and ineffective, thereby putting the entire enterprise at risk over the long term. And as a result, the Augustine Meese report made several recommendations that Congress could make to improve the nuclear weapons enterprise, such as having the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee approve the confirmation of the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary, the Department of Energy. The report also recommended implementing information sharing and collaboration mechanisms to unify and strengthen its mission-focused oversight across cognizant committees and to better harmonize the direction and oversight across the enterprise mission areas. My question is, what are your thoughts on these recommendations, and do you have any additional recommendations on how Congress might improve its handling of the nuclear weapons enterprise?
Let me answer that question directly, and then if I could say a little bit more about the report itself. I think we're very forward-leaning and courageous people sitting at this panel and in the NNSA and the DOE, but I think the last thing we would deign to do would be to tell the Congress how it ought to organize itself in terms of jurisdiction. So we maybe privately, we read that part of the report with great interest. It's a good report, and we thank the people on the panel who have spent over a year of their lives contributing to this. It was a very distinguished and esteemed panel. They've come up with a lot of ideas. I think everyone at this table, as well as throughout the Department of Energy and NNSA, spent a lot of time with the two chairs as well as each of the panel members. As you point out, they come out with 19 general recommendations and 63 sub-recommendations. And we think those recommendations fall into three different categories. The first are things which the Department of Energy or the NNSA can implement now based on existing authorities. And indeed, since Secretary Moniz came into office now over a year, almost 2 years ago, many of the recommendations that fall into this category, he's already moving out on very, very smartly. In terms of program management, project management, security, relationship with the laboratories, changing the culture, thinking of the entire 17 laboratory as a single integrated whole. Others of the recommendations are clearly beyond our purview. There were a number of recommendations that related to how the White House is organized and how the Congress is organized. And then there's probably a third category of things that would require legislative action in terms of changing the way in which we do business. Congress has asked that the NNSA, that the administrator submit a report giving our views on this report. That is due on the 17th, I believe, of this month. We are in the process of writing that now, like Dr. Cook mentioned earlier on a report he's looking at. I've looked at that multiple times over the last several weeks, and we'll be forwarding it to the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary soon to get their comments before we send it over. I might add, this is not the only report that's out there. There are a couple of other reports, another commission chartered by the Congress as well as by the National Academy of Science that's doing also very, very good work by very knowledgeable and dedicated people to looking at how we can improve our processes.
Okay. The report also recommended replacing a risk averse culture with a risk management culture. Changing the culture of any organization is, of course, very, very difficult. Do you think that there is a need to change that culture? And if so, do you have any thoughts on how you would go about that?
Yes, I do. But first of all, let me say safety is always paramount in any of our operations. We are dealing with materials and chemicals that are inherently dangerous if not handled properly. So we have, as an enterprise over decades, developed processes by which we ensure that everything we do takes into account the safety of the operation, the safety of the people who are working on it, and the safety of the people who live in the community surrounding our laboratories and our production facilities. So we will always focus on ensuring safety. But at some point, there has to be a management of the risks and exploring various alternative courses of actions about how you mitigate risk. Sometimes there are multiple options. And what we need to do, what I think under the leadership now at the Department of Energy and the leadership in the NNSA, is we are empowering our people to say if they have a better approach as to how to deal with a safety concern, that they explore all the options, that they be fully vetted, and they don't necessarily need to jump at the first recommendation that comes up. So it really is a question of managing risk, but that's what we mean by managing risk, is not diminishing the importance we attach to safety or our absolute requirement that we be as safe as we possibly can be, but to think about other ways of getting at the same objective.
Mr. Fortenberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Klotz, welcome. First of all, let me thank you for the very respectful and responsive manner in which you've dialogued with me and other members of the committee outside the formal structure here. It's very insightful for us to be able to gather your expertise without the constraints of the formality of time in the committee. So I'm really grateful to you in that regard. I recognize that you're hoping to delay non-proliferation discussions when we have committee hearings coming up in the next several weeks. However, let's consider this the preliminary round in that regard, because you're tasked with nuclear weapons stockpiles, nuclear non-proliferation, as well as nuclear naval reactors. But that second leg of the stool is absolutely so critical. We've tried to take a decided focus on it in order to dive deeper and really evaluate whether the entire architecture of the approach is creating the highest and best possible outcome, which is the prevention of something going wrong in the nuclear world, particularly the spread of nuclear weapons and that technology. In this regard, there is a line in your overview here that says the nuclear non-proliferation program is also restructuring to place more emphasis on capabilities as opposed to specific programs. And I think that actually hints at what I'm talking about. This is when you're referring to the reorganization that you've done internally with some of your accounts. As an aside as well, what we've done as an office, and I think it reflects a creative effort on our part, but it also is a bit frustrating because we cannot find a singular source, maybe there isn't one, which could give us a comprehensive overview of the various non-proliferation efforts across agencies. Now, here's our attempt at it right here, which is about 25 different programs, some of which are under the umbrella of cooperative threat reduction. Others are not. And then there are other related programs which are smaller that, again, don't appear in any strategic overview, a document that has a strategic overview. Maybe that exists, maybe it doesn't. Maybe we have to talk about it in another setting. If it doesn't exist, I think it is confirmation of what I think what I'm concerned about, as well as what you're doing, trying to look at capabilities rather than just continuing to focus on specific programs. That's fundamentally my commentary. I'd like you to respond to that, because this is absolutely so critical that we continue to think constructively, creatively, in light of emerging threats, in light of constrained budgets, in light of not getting caught into what I call just inheriting legacies, because on the Appropriations Committee, we basically are confined to choosing whether or not to plus something up or to cut it. But the deeper question is, how do we get to its fundamental purpose, maybe in a more effective way? Now, that involves authorizing committees as such. But this is, in my mind, an appropriate place to have this dialogue with you. So I'll stop there and let you respond.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for the question, and thank you very much for your leadership in this particular endeavor. I was aware of it before I came into government, and I'm delighted to have now the opportunity of being in this position to work more directly with you and your staff on this issue. The defense nuclear nonproliferation part of our portfolio is an extremely important part of our portfolio. As we were discussing earlier, however, it's one that's often misunderstood, and it's often one that's overlooked. We have people working in countries, not just in Russia, where a lot of the effort has been over the past couple decades, but around the world to reduce the threat of nuclear proliferation and nuclear terrorism through a variety of programs and means that begin with the fundamental assumption that the one thing that a would-be proliferant or a would-be terrorist needs first and foremost is the special nuclear material that's associated with nuclear or radiological devices. So if we can lock that down, if we can secure that down, if we can create security cultures which impose best practices, if we can get to the right diagnostic tools and things like securing borders, then we have dealt with a lot of that. What we have done, which I hope will address some of your concerns about one sort of comprehensive presentation of this, is the Secretary of Energy made a decision that just as we put out a document known as the Stockpile Stewardship Management Plan every year, which goes in great detail about each of our life extension programs, our construction projects, our science and our research at the laboratories and at the production plants, we need to have a companion document that addresses this particular part of our mission. So at roughly the same time that the Stockpile Stewardship Management Plan is released, which will be in the next 2 to 3 weeks or so, we hope to be able to release a document which covers this. What we have done, as you rightly pointed out, there were a lot of programs that grew up in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War that were focused on specific types of activities, a lot of them in the former Soviet Union or in Russia. We have taken, over the last couple of years, what we call an over-the-horizon approach to think about what are the threats in the area of nuclear proliferation and nuclear terrorism in the future that we need to be dealing with. A future in which more and more countries are pursuing the path of civil nuclear facilities. More and more countries will have access to this type of nuclear material, and these may be countries that do not have the security culture of working with these types of activities or materials. So we have reorganized our office for doing that into broad general areas: material management and minimization, global material security, non-proliferation arms control, research and development. And we've also proposed changing our budget categories to move nuclear counterterrorism and incident response from the weapons activity account into the Defense Nuclear Non-Proliferation account, under the firm belief that we need to approach this whole mission as a continuum that runs from preventing people having access to nuclear radiological materials, and then, God forbid, if they do, countering that acquisition, and then, God forbid, if they ever use it, responding to their actions.
Well, thank you, General, for that. Is the report going to look at this in depth in terms of what's under your authorities alone, or is it is it going to look at it through the lens of the multi-agencies that are involved with this?
We will, the report, and again, it's another report I've been spending my time reading over the last several weeks. We will address the interagency the work that's done, but beyond the interagency work, also the international work that's done, work that we do bilaterally with partner nations, as well as work that we do with multilateral organizations like the International.
So this is going to be the place for the comprehensive understanding of the whole of government approach to non-proliferation.
We will discuss the whole of government approach, but there, as you rightly point out, there are other programs within the government, particularly in the Department of Defense, the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, which in the past was largely focused on nuclear, but over time is now focused more on chemical and biological threats to our security and the security of our allies. But the coordinating mechanism for work in this area by agencies is in the National Security Council staff as a congressionally mandated, created organization. It performs the convening and the integrating work in this very, very important area. And I have the highest respect for those people in the National Security Council who are working on this. They have deep experience and passion for this particular activity.
Thank you.
Chairman Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator, thank you, Dr. Cook, General Davis, appreciate your being here. Thank you for your service. Just want to carry on with what Mr. Fortenberry is saying, but more regarding a GAO report that came out recently, more about domestic radiological material, which I think in some respects may be more pragmatic than some material overseas. It seems that we have this material everywhere because we can't seem to get together to build a central depository for this. I think we need to get around to that, but that's another subject, to better secure that material. But right now, as you know, that material is everywhere. Mm-hmm. And even those folks who had some issues about some material, I think some incidents between 2006 and 2012 where some radioactive material was stolen. And given the terrorist threats that we have, I also get to serve on the Intelligence Committee and get to listen to the threat assessments, and we may have the highest threat assessment since 9/11 right now. That's not a secret in itself. And so this material it's advertised where it's located. Some of it is not secure as much as it should be, as I'm sure you're aware. And a dirty bomb certainly could create some damage, but certainly a lot of panic.
Exactly.
And so where the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is responsible for licensing and regulating this, but I think your agency is a big responsibility to working with NRC to ensure the safety of these materials. And is any comment about that, about how we're going to secure those domestic radiological sources?
Thank you. No, sir, you put your finger on a very worrisome issue. You're right, the NRC has the responsibility for regulating that particular aspect of it, but what we have, I think, in addition to the NRC, what we have is special technical insight into how to deal with these how to detect these types of materials, how to tell when they're being transported, how best to secure them, and also how you can come up with alternative approaches to the use of particular types of materials. For instance, one of the things that we, the NNSA and the Department of Energy, have been leading is in the production of isotopes for medical purposes, moving away from using highly enriched uranium in the production of those to using low enriched uranium, thereby reducing the attractiveness perhaps of anyone who might want to try to acquire special nuclear material through that route. But I should go back to this report that we discussed earlier. We've committed to your staff that we will brief them and you before we release this particular report. And there will be classified, you mentioned the intelligence aspect, but there will be a classified annex to that, which will also be, obviously, we can discuss in a more private setting.
Okay. It's my understanding that the NNSA is developing technology that would, if successful, improve tracking of radiological sources while in transit. Is that technology being developed? If not, what's the timeline of that?
Let me get back to you, sir, if I could, with a specific details on that. But yes, the detecting, tracking, locating special nuclear materials is a long-standing research, scientific research and development activity of many of the NNSA labs, but not just the NNSA labs, the other laboratories in the 17 laboratories in the DOE enterprise. In fact, Idaho National Lab, I was just up at Idaho National Labs along with some members of this subcommittee a couple weeks ago, and Idaho National Labs is one of the leading facilities in terms of doing this type of research, but also training people, not just from the United States, but from other countries in detecting radiological and nuclear materials.
And finally, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that we find a suitable depository location. I think there's one in up part of Nevada to Southern Nevada. Okay, well, close enough for government work to deposit some of this material.
Thank you. Mr. Valadeo?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for taking some time for us today. Overhead rates for fiscal year 2013 were 41% for Los Alamos, 61% for Lawrence Livermore, and 43% for Sandia. Mr. Administrator, in the past Congress has expressed concerns the high overhead costs of the NSSA's national laboratories. These overhead expenses are charged to each program, project, and activity for the infrastructure, general, and administrative, laboratory research and development, pensions, and other costs which are paid out of an indirect cost pool. While this is a valid accounting structure to pay for costs, there is very little insight into what is being paid out of these indirect cost pools, since they are entirely managed by the contractor. These rates and the resulting size of these indirect cost pools are approved annually by you, the administrator, and represent a very large percentage of your budget costs. What insight do you have into the costs that are being paid from these contractor-managed indirect cost pools?
Let me address, it's come up a couple of times. A piece of this is LDRD, and I'd like to address that head on. In fact, I'll give a point of concern in this regard. Because of the pressure that we have with regard to funding the life extension programs and the stockpile maintenance for an increasingly aged stockpile, we've never had a stockpile this old, then because of those pressures, we actually had to reduce our RDT&E account. If you looked at the 15 request, compared it to the 16, we did not have increases. We reduced over the FinCEP period about $1/3 billion in that area, coupled with the reduction in the LDRD, you could call it overhead rate. It is a tax from 8% to 6%. That coupled effect means that we're focusing very well on the short term, but to an extent at the expense of the long term. Now, that is a part of the overhead. We have achieved savings. We've articulated those to the Department of Defense, and we've worked those in a report that has come back here. So that if you look at the ratio of the overhead to direct expenses, and if you understand that RDT&E coupled with a reduction in LDRD gives us a long-term concern, you can actually see a trend that is downward, not upward. But at the same point, I want to address that that's a concern. Be happy to take a follow-up question if you wanted to. If I could add one more point, just to help thinking about LDRD, almost everything of importance in the nuclear deterrent, in the weapon program, originated in LDRD, and then it moved to R&D. The radar in the B-61, the W-88, the W-87 all came from LDRD. If we look at things like the future LEPs, most of the components came out of LDRD. We saved the better part of, I would just roughly estimate it, $1 to $2 billion by doing the research and development to determine how long plutonium pits last. That's tied to the overhead in that it's tied to LDRD. But I just wanted to emphasize that point.
Thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Kaptur?
Mr. Chairman, Administrator Klotz, in this new foundation for the nuclear enterprise, there's a sentence right before the end that says that fundamental void is the lack of an affordable, executable joint DoD-DOE vision, plan, or program for the future of nuclear deterrence capabilities. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. And I recall that sentence. There is
That's a pretty strong sentence.
There are a series of directives that come from the White House, that come from the Department of Defense, that lay out in some, and most of them are classified. The Nuclear Posture Review was not, but many of the other documents are, that taken as a body provide direction, and very clear direction, I might add, to virtually all of our activities, from our work on the life extension programs, to the size of the stockpile, to the characteristics and nature of the stockpile, but also to the delivery systems. So I think if, while you may not go to, one particular piece of paper that lays all that out, my sense would be that across these half dozen or so documents, every element of what we do is very clearly articulated. Would you?
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Cook.
If I can follow up, the way in which the stockpile stewardship and management plan has evolved over the last 5 years, half decade, has been increasingly with participation of all the other elements that are outside of NNSA as well. So we give, when we issue, right now, we'll issue, as the administrator said, in about 3 weeks, a major revision of the plan. In the other year, we do an update, but this will have a major revision. All elements, DoD policy, DoD AT&L, the Air Force, the Navy, the Joint Staff, Strategic Command, and NNSA all look at that document to integrate those aspects of the nuclear warheads that coupled to the platforms, that is in one document. And they actually provide some of the writing and some of the parts. It undergoes review by OMB. It undergoes review within the Nuclear Weapon Council. And I think if there's one place to look, you can look at that. There are other plans for platforms that are connected. Again, I'd offer General Davis the opportunity to comment with regard to this. And by the nature of what we mentioned earlier, inviting the services into the quarterly reviews we do for every single life extension. We've given such transparency that they're no longer stating any concern about transparency. In fact, it takes a lot of their time to come over to the Forrestal building so often to go through these reviews that we've enjoined them in.
Do you agree with the report's recommendation that a new name be assigned to the Department of Energy and Nuclear Security?
Personally, we haven't put out the report yet. Our response on March 17th, I think Department of Energy sounds just fine.
Okay. The report also says that there was a lack of an urgent and clear mission and lack of follow-through in assuring adequate performance to modernize the nuclear stockpile. When we look at the amount of money that's been spent over the years, I guess there's a question of whether there was adequate, it doesn't appear that there was inadequate funding, but with the cost overruns and so forth in so many accounts, something happened to performance.
Well, indeed, and that's one of the things which, as I indicated earlier, since Secretary Moniz has come in, and now that you have leadership in the NNSA, that we have been focusing like a laser beam on in terms of improving and empowering the role of our program managers for the various activities we have, the life extension programs, the various commodities, uranium, plutonium, tritium they have to deal with, as well as project management. 3 years ago, the NNSA created an organization called the Office of Acquisition and Program Management, which has brought a level of expertise, experience, and discipline to the process of project management and acquisition that we probably did not have in the NNSA or within the DOE.
Do you think that one of the problems with the overspending is that the talents no longer existed in our country, or that the componentry was not able to be built, that there was a very shallow bench, or that you just didn't have people who were capable, which is what you're saying? I'm wondering if you look back and sort of sum it up, what happened? What happened with the amounts that were appropriated, but then, you know, oh gosh, we don't have the correct amount there, you know, add some more, add billions on more here. How do you encapsulate that for the American people so they understand what happened?
Well, again, there are a number of reasons why costs go up. What I suggested earlier was that within the department and within the NNSA in particular, there was not what we might refer to as regular order in the way in which other departments, say the Department of Defense, address the whole question of acquisition and project management, and the tools and the discipline and the process by which they go through to ensure that cost and schedule are met, from having various alternatives which are analyzed, from cost estimation to the actual program and project management, which are both science and art, and that didn't exist. So we're within the department and within the NNSA and within our field offices, we are building that type of capacity. It's not something we can turn on and off like a light switch. We have to recruit the people. We have to rely upon the good offices of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to provide us augmented capabilities in this area. But we're beginning to see some success in terms of the work that has been done in this area. For instance, the GAO has taken off their list of high-risk projects for all projects $750 million and below. Now, we still have 3 projects that cost more than $750 million that are on the high-risk list, and those are the ones which we are, again, focusing on and getting control in terms of our approach, our analysis of alternatives, our cost estimation, and holding both the federal, those responsible for federal oversight, as well as the contractors accountable. Now, in terms of specific life extension programs.
Sure. Let me try answer quickly and then get ready to turn over to General Davis. I saw the commission develop as well. I think to an extent the comment that you read, Representative, might be a bit of a dated comment. And so it took a couple of years to really form up the review. In that period of time, we've made considerable progress. I mentioned earlier the formality we brought into life extension projects. And if I could comment, there's a difference between the LEPs and then nuclear construction. In fact, America has not done much nuclear construction. And so the administrator, certainly my colleague Bob Raines and others, found that the nuclear construction which we need to do for some of these projects does not exist in industry. Getting NQA1 qualified vendors who are in short supply is difficult. Turning back to the stockpile, we've made some alignments better part of a year ago with General Davis. So the stockpile, in defense programs, I have 6 organizational units. 3 of them are now firmly aligned with General Davis. The stockpile that we have, the life extension programs, and also the Office of Secure Transportation, which you don't hear about very often, and that's a really good thing. They perform every day some very critical tasks.
And you're asking for more money for them, I think, here.
We are. We took some reductions in a couple of years.
14.9%.
Yes. In that area, we need to now begin the work to refresh or change from the safeguard transporters that we have to a new transporter that will have, again, important security features that are updated. But the disciplines that we've included both in the stockpile for the life extension programs and acquisitions and in construction, I think, are substantially different today than we had 3 or 4 years ago. Still 2 years ago, the view that was that we were moving, but we'd not arrived to a point where we needed to. I'm fairly confident that on the LEP side, we've got good actions occurring now. And the construction is shaping up just fine, in my view.
Well, 2 examples. I mean, this
Very
year,
briefly.
Yeah, we delivered the new modern plant at Kansas City, moving out of the Bannister Road Complex that was built during the Second World War into a facility that's half the size and much more efficient and much more environmentally friendly facility. We also delivered the high explosive pressing facility through the good offices of the Army Corps of Engineers at Pantex in Amarillo, on time and on budget. So, we are starting to make progress in this area. We still have a lot of work to do. We still have a lot of bench strength we need to build within our organizations, but I think we're on the right path.
Are we not educating people?
Very
They
briefly.
just don't want
Very
to come,
briefly,
they
excuse
just
me.
don't want to come back to they don't want to work for the government.
I need to see if any other members, we're voting now, and we have a few minutes left before the vote. If there are any other members that have any brief questions that they could ask for, Mr. Voskowski? Do you have some?
Chairman, thank you very much. I have several questions for the record if I could, but just want to, while you're here, emphasize I have a great concern about the potential disposition of radioactive metal, particularly steel, into the market, and the potential disruption to the domestic supply given consumer concerns. And Dr. Cook, again, for the record, in relation to the answers you gave to the gentleman from California on overhead costs, I did not clearly understand your answer. That's my fault, not yours. But the question I guess I would ask for the record is whether or not, in fact, you would agree with the Inspector General's assertion that there's potentially a significant unallowable cost the way that overhead is computed. And secondly, appreciate the contributions that have been made by lab-directed research, but I understand there is a statutory maximum of 6%, and that today we're at 10%, and that there is a deadline to be met by October 1st, if I'm correct.
Could I address?
And just again, for the record, to the extent we have time.
Okay. I appreciate that. There will be other questions that come for the record. One thing I do want to ask you before you go, and you'll probably have to answer this for the record also, but I'm sure there'll be other questions coming. The subcommittee requires the department to provide an independently verified cost estimate for every construction project that exceeds $100 million. This estimate is important for the subcommittee as it helps determine whether the project is affordable before we can commence construction. You have provided a project strategy for the uranium processing facility that envisions significant funding being appropriated for construction in advance of setting the project baseline. In fact, you have already issued a pre-solicitation to begin some of these activities in fiscal year 2015 before completing a conceptual design of the facility. Why should Congress provide funding to begin construction activities before we have a verified cost estimate? And in your budget justification, it lists a whole bunch of to-be-determines and not applicables. And will you be able to provide an update of those project cost sheets for the record?
We will.
Okay. And you can answer the rest of it in
Yes, sir.
the submission, because I hate to have you stay here for an hour while we go over and vote. That's not a good time of ours or yours. So I do appreciate you coming today to discuss this with the subcommittee. As I said, please have the responses to the questions in and the information requested in within 4 weeks as we start to put together a budget, and we'll see you again when we start talking about non-proliferation and other activities.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee's adjourned.